Hello, today I'm going to be talking about the source filter theory of vowel and consonant production. It can be divided into three components: power, source, and filter. Let's start with power. So power reflects the many systems that supply the energy for speech. This is particularly important during running speech, which is conversational, like how we're talking right now, just normally. The power of speech comes from breathing. Breathing and talking at the same time is a cognitive activity. This means it is a highly controlled activity which ensures a continuous, steady supply of air while we talk. First, lung volume refers to the amount of air that is in our lungs. Lung volume directly affects the pressure exerting on the vocal folds, and a large amount of lung volume allows us to speak for a longer time before having to take another breath. At the beginning of a sentence or an utterance, we inhale to increase lung volume. This happens when the diaphragm contracts and moves down, and the inspiratory ribcage muscles contract to lift and expand the chest wall. As the thoracic cavity expands, lung volume increases and alveolar pressure decreases. It drops below atmospheric pressure, which allows air to flow into the lungs. Alveolar pressure is the air pressure inside of the lungs. During speech, alveolar pressure must be slightly higher than atmospheric pressure so that air can flow outward through the vocal folds. As lung volume decreases during exhalation, alveolar pressure increases. This pressure pushes against the vocal folds. It maintains airflow and it allows us to produce sound. And it is very important that this pressure remains steady because changes in alveolar pressure can affect our loudness or our vocal quality, for example. Next, muscular pressure is what allows us to control these systems. The diaphragm, inspiratory ribcage muscles, expiratory ribcage muscles, and abdominal muscles, they all work together to help us out. So during speech exhalation, the diaphragm remains partially engaged. This helps resist the natural elastic recoil of our lungs so that alveolar pressure does not rise or fall too fast. The inspiratory ribcage muscles are also resist the chest wall collapsing. They stabilize our lung volume and maintain our alveolar pressure. As lung volume becomes lower later in an utterance, elastic recoil weakens. At that point, the expiratory ribcage muscles contract, compressing the ribcage, raising the alveolar pressure, and allowing airflow to continue. The abdominal muscles also contract, pushing the diaphragm up, which further increases alveolar pressure. This is important when we want to speak louder or when we want to sustain a louder or longer phrase, for example. So when we articulate a vowel in a normal voice, like when it's not whispering or creaky sounding, the result can be visualized on a waveform. A vowel's waveform is called a complex periodic wave. Here the vocal folds will vibrate in a regular pattern to produce a certain pitch. But the vocal tract here shapes the sound by amplifying certain frequencies. So going off of that, the source of the sound is generated by the vocal folds. And this is the foundation for all speech sounds. When the vocal folds vibrate in a repeating cycle, the waveform is periodic, as I just mentioned with the vowels. The vibration rate helps determine the fundamental frequency, or FO, which we perceive as pitch. Faster vibrations mean higher pitch, while slower vibrations mean lower pitch. Intensity or duration depends mainly on subglottal pressure. When air pressure below the vocal folds increases, the vocal folds vibrate with greater amplitude, which produces a louder sound. Duration refers to how long the vocal folds continue to vibrate. As long as airflow and enough vocal fold positioning are maintained, voicing continues. But when the vibration stops, the sound ends. Now, phonation quality describes how the vocal folds vibrate. In modal voice, which is a regular voice, how I'm talking right now, the vibrations of the vocal folds are normal with complete closure. But in a breathy voice, the vocal folds are not fully closed and they allow extra air to flow in. So that's the difference between ah and ah. With a creaky voice, the vocal folds are tightly compressed and they vibrate slowly and irregularly, like ah. Because vocal fold vibrations can make a complex wave, it produces not only fundamental frequency but also something called harmonics. Harmonics are whole number multiples of fundamental frequency. For example, if the fundamental frequency is 200 Hz, the harmonics will appear at 400, 600, and 800 Hz, and so on. Harmonics are evenly spaced, and their amplitude is usually decreased as frequency increases. The exact harmonic pattern also depends on phonation type, such as modal, breathy, or creaky voices. These harmonics form the sound energy through the vocal tract when the vocal tract shapes the sounds. How does the vocal tract act? What does it act as? It acts as a filter, amplifying certain harmonics while dampening others. This results in formant frequencies, which is the peaks of the resulting sounds. So, the first formant frequency is primarily influenced by tongue height. High vowels like E have a low F1, while low vowels like Ah have a high F1. The second formant, F2, is mainly determined by tongue advancement. Front vowels like E have a high F2, while back vowels like Oo have a low F2. F3 is the degree of lip rounding, and it can further lower formant frequencies. Together, the source and the filter explain how we produce and receive the distinct different sounds of speech. Speaking of distinctions, each vowel has a unique acoustic signature, and that can be determined by the frequency amplified by the vocal tract. These frequencies can be mapped using the International Phonetic Alphabet Chart, or IPA chart, which represents the different sounds and their acoustic properties. The vocal tract's resonances, especially F1 and F2, determine the sound of each vowel. For instance, the vowel E has a high F1 and low F2. Now, Ah has low F1 and high F2. The interaction between these formants gives each vowel a distinct sound, making it recognizable in speech. In addition to the formants, anatomical structures such as the tongue, lips, and the shape of the oral cavity contribute to the vowel's acoustic signatures. The position of the tongue and opening of the mouth influence the formant frequencies. When producing consonants with normal voice, we can produce complex aperiodic waves, unlike the periodic waves of vowels. Stops like p or t create brief bursts of air appearing like sharp spikes in the waveform. So, to simplify, consonant waveforms are like irregular, not smooth, like vowels. Lastly, I want to talk about vocal quality and perception. So, categorical perception is a concept which refers to the way we categorize sounds. Even though sounds we hear can be different in terms of their formants, we perceive them as distinct categories. For example, we can hear the difference between the vowels E and even though their frequencies might not be dramatically different. This ability to categorize helps us distinguish between the many sounds we encounter in speech. Lastly, I want to talk about voice onset time, and it is the time between the release of the stop consonant and the start of vocal fold vibration. Voice stops like B have short voice onset time, while voiceless stops like P have longer voice onset time. Voice onset helps listeners distinguish between voiced and voiceless consonants. Thank you for listening.